Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of What Makes You Click. I'm really delighted today to welcome Bob Cook. And I've known Bob for quite a long time, but this is actually the first time I've ever seen him. So it's slightly unusual. We're going to talk horses today. Bob is a pioneer in the equine world and still very active. I just said to him before we started the recording, he's actually a contemporary of my father's, a few years younger. He graduated from the Royal Veterinary College in 52. My father graduated in 46. But in a way, they've had quite similar careers. My father ended up as an anatomist before going into practice. And he focused actually on the biliary system of the horse, whereas Bob decided to focus on ENT. And he's a real pioneer on ear, nose, and throat issues in the horse. His paper from the late 70s, early 80s on head shaking in horses, which is a multi-part article, I think is a classic. It was when I was at vet school, and I still recommend it to my students because I think whilst people have found even more things to add to your list of about 60 differentials, everybody needs to read this. And I think it's such an important article because it sort of inspired my PhD, and I'll come back to that later on. But I'm going to say a little bit more about Bob before I let him get a word in edgeways. He graduated from the Royal Veterinary College, ended up as a house surgeon at Cambridge, lecturer in Glasgow before going to Nairobi, and then moving to the Animal Health Trust, then to the University of Illinois, and then settled in Cummings Vet School, University of Tufts. Bob is still very active, although he actually became an emeritus professor about the time that I moved into academia. So he stopped drawing a salary as I started to draw one from the academic. He's very much known for his concerns about the role of the bit in horses, but also the roles of shoeing. And that's probably what we're going to talk about. So, and as I said, a lot of what Bob has written in the past has inspired me personally. And I did my PhD actually in 3 repetitive behavior problems in horses: cribbing, weaving, and head shaking. And it was Bob's work that really inspired the head shaking stuff. Head shaking is a condition which is very frustrating for vets because they seem to, even if they identify something which they think can cause it, then when you treat it, it doesn't seem to get better. But there are so many differentials, and my work looked at trying to look at the different behavioral signs to see if that could guide the process. But Bob is more than just head shaking. He's also a pioneer in a whole range of ENT, basically anything around the ear, nose, and throat of the horse. Bob was probably the first person to do something in it. So where in racing horses, where they can sort of end up swallowing sometimes called sort of swallowing the palate, or they suddenly sort of break down in the racing due to dorsal displacement of the soft palate. That was one of Bob's pioneering pieces of work, the instability there. As I said, I've already mentioned the head shaking work, what's known as roaring in horses, recurrent laryngeal neuropathy, again, one of Bob's pioneering areas. Scabbard trachea, where is the sort of collapse of the trachea, again, an area that hadn't been looked at till Bob got there. Exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage, or otherwise known as negative pressure pulmonary edema, again, another of your areas, Bob. And sort of some of the catastrophic things that happen to racehorses. I have a long list of things here, but the other thing is, and I was really flattered, I think it was 2009 when you contacted me and said, you've got these data, could I help with the analysis? So we have published together one paper.
I was very grateful for your help with the statistics on that work and the data. That was such a help.
We'll chat a little bit about that in the course of this. But you're one of 3 cooks that I've worked with on head shaking in horses. The other 2 were 2 sisters, one of which we published with, where we looked at some of the signs and issues. The other one we didn't publish, but we started to do some modeling of airflow in head shakers, and I think we'll get to chat to that about that. So It's a real pleasure to finally meet you and catch up with you. It's been far too long, and thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. And I guess my first question is, why did you get interested in ENT in horses in the first place?
Interesting question. When I first went to the Royal Veterinary College as a lecturer, Professor Formston said to me, he said, well, I don't know what I'm going to ask you to teach because the syllabus has already been shared out and it's already covered. And my thought was, well, you've just advertised a lectureship in surgery, so presumably there is something I could do. And he said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. He said, I've been teaching the head. My interest, his interest was the eye. And he said, I'll retain my interest in the eye. I'll lecture on the eye and I'll give you the rest to deal with. And so he gave me the head, neck and chest possibly. And I looked around to discover what particular section of the medical curriculum that seemed to fit best into. And it appeared to me that ear, nose and throat was the relevant specialty. So I began to model and to research the medical literature on matters ear, nose and throat. And that was what set my compass, shall we say, by way of research at that first point. And then many years later, far too many years later, it's about 43 years later, I think it was, it suddenly dawned on me, something that should have dawned on me when I was a student, let alone when I was a graduate, and certainly when I was teaching, it should have dawned on me, but for 43 years, it didn't. And then by a wonderful serendipitous chance, a man contacted me with information. He'd read a book that I'd written about speed in the racehorse, and he thought perhaps I would be interested in the bridle that he was using. It was a bit-free bridle. So I said, well, send me one. And he did. This is Alan Buck. And he sent me this bridle. I put it on and tried it with an off-the-track racehorse, 5-year-old, whose owner had purchased this horse at a knockdown price, I imagine, and found that she couldn't really do anything with it. It was difficult to get out of a trot, and even when it was in a canter, it wouldn't stay in a canter. It was a very difficult horse to ride altogether. So she brought this to me, and I put the bit-free bridle on it. She rode it, and I rode it, and I realized, and she realized from that day, that suddenly removing the bit from that horse, the horse became a different animal altogether, and was a joy to ride and a pleasure to ride. And both the rider and the horse were so much happier. And it was really that one day's experience, and followed by many, many others similar, that prompted me to ask a question that I should have asked myself 40 or more years previously, which simply was, what does a bit do to a horse? And since about 1997, that's the question I've been answering myself, for myself.
And I think
I hope, yes.
So I think for the benefit of listeners, because obviously you and I both have veterinary trainings, and people might not appreciate the fact that unlike humans, horses are obligate nasal breathers. They have to breathe through their nose.
Yes.
Whereas we, if we're running a race, we breathe through our mouth. And if a horse tries to breathe through its mouth, it can't actually get the air into its lungs very efficiently. And I know this is obviously something which you've studied extensively. So the sort of one of your sort of early papers was about how bits potentially cause in effect a physiological confusion in horses. You've got
Indeed.
something in your mouth, but you're asking the horse to breathe heavily through its nose. And I think that's a really sort of fundamental point that we don't appreciate. Interestingly, when
Yes.
I've asked people to ride in a bitless bridle, the first thing they usually say is, I don't feel I can control the horse. I don't feel I've got any control. I'm thinking, in which case you're probably not been using the bit properly in the first place.
Well, we could talk about that.
Well, let's go with it then, because that's usually their sort of first reaction. But maybe let's start a little bit further back. So you had this sort of moment with somebody, and you. So what are your feelings now about the bit in horses?
I am so anxious to persuade and to provide the evidence to give riders the confidence to give it a try, to give bit-free riding a try. I understand their fears. We've all been, well, for about 5 millennia, human animals have been using the bit on the horse. And I can understand the concern and anxiety that riders have about dispensing with what they have always understood to be an absolutely fundamental means of controlling the horse. But that's a myth. The bit does not control a horse. In fact, my experience is that it's the most common cause of loss of control. If you put a foreign body, a piece of metal, one or more pieces of metal in a horse's mouth, you're stimulating the digestive system, anticipating perhaps that the horse is about to eat. And yet what you're needing when you're about to exercise a horse and ride it, you need to stimulate the respiratory system. So the bit in the mouth stimulates completely the wrong system. It's diametrically opposed to what you're after. And to put it in another way, to put a bit in the mouth of a horse that is about to exercise is akin to putting a muzzle on a horse that is about to eat.
That's good point. So yeah, I mean, so when we've got this sort of situation, as I said, people often sort of, if they lose control of the horse, they think the solution is to use a more severe bit. A number of student projects that we've done over the years, and again, we've not published any of these, but I've had students basically go onto yards and look at the number of lesions in horses' mouths, and whether or not the horses are ridden, and what type of bit that they're ridden in. And we've also looked at Welsh mountain ponies off the fells. And the important thing is they don't have any lesions in their mouth because nobody's putting a bit into their mouth. But consistently, what we see is between 50 and 60% of horses on a yard have got either, the nips in the corner of their mouth, they've got ulcers on their tongue, they've got bruising, the various types of bruise that you can get on the gums, etc. And it doesn't seem to matter whether it's what we might consider a mild bit, a single jointed snaffle, or something more severe. We get this sort of figure out there. So anybody who's thinking about sort of, well, they don't do any harm and they make me feel better, I would challenge that opinion, because when you got a mouth ulcer, it hurts. And if you've got a mouth ulcer and you go and chuck a piece of metal on top of it, it's going to make it even worse.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and I agree. And then there's a tremendous amount of data now, information about the damage that the bit does in the mouth. And yes, with further searching, I would suggest and I recommend that there is also now a considerable amount of literature about the damage that the horse, the damage that the bit creates, not just in the mouth, but in other parts of the horse as well, including the lungs and including the whole of the musculoskeletal system, because a bit is a common cause of gait deformities, and many subtle, or what are thought of as subtle lamenesses in competition horses, in dressage horses, are in fact prompted and caused by the bit. And one of the things that I now recommend for anyone who is working up a case of subtle lameness is to remove the bit and see if that subtle lameness now disappears.
So,
because bit lameness is a very common finding in my experience.
So I know that you were one of the first people to write, certainly in the English language, about the synchronization of breathing and the gaits of the horse. But can you just elaborate a little bit more on sort of why you think the bit is affecting the gait of the horse? What's going on in that situation?
Well, primarily, I think it's pain, and it's upsetting the horse's whole sensory experience, and the horse is as it were, its mind is focused on that pain in his mouth, and under those conditions, he won't be listening to what the rider is trying to communicate to him. He will be much more concerned with how to do something about that pain, how to get rid of it, how to avoid it, and so on. A horse is as shy of the bit as a bat is aversive to daylight. Okay. And you can't really establish any harmony with your horse whilst you are unintentionally causing it pain. It's
when you mention lameness,
expectation to expect a horse to learn anything whilst it's in pain. A school child sitting listening to a schoolmaster or schoolmistress isn't going to be hearing anything, and certainly isn't going to be absorbing anything worthwhile, because that child will be focusing on the pain. And pain is, again, diametrically opposed to learning. So the bit gets in the way of the education of the horse, the training of the horse. It gets in the way of everything that we wish to do.
Do you think the avoidance of the bit can interfere then with the gait, and that's why it appears to be lame?
Indeed.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So
yes.
Obviously,
it's pain and balance and suffocation, and breathlessness is part of it. We talk about, and Professor Meller, who's done some very good, interesting work on this, points out that breathlessness is a welfare problem for the horse, and for animals in general. It's in man, it's the cause of air hunger and shortage of breath and tightness of the chest, anxiety, and all these sensations, I'm sure, are experienced by the horse, including fear escalating into panic, which leads to a horse bolting uncontrollably because of the pain and his inability to apparently escape from it. The horse is a prey animal, and its first line of defense is to run. And it receives a sharp pain in its mouth. Is convinced that there's a monster there. Well, he's not sure where it is, but he runs instinctively. That's his first reaction. If he doesn't run, he shies, he spooks, he rears, and so on, all of which are dangerous, both for the horse and for the rider. So just accidents occur, and it's not, in my opinion, it just is not safe. I wouldn't myself now anymore consider riding a horse with a bit in its mouth for my own safety, let alone for the happiness of the horse.
Interestingly, many years ago, I was involved in a legal case. Unfortunately, the lady was killed, and there was some horses that had escaped from a field. And the question came up as to whether or not, was the escape of the horses, did that spook the lady's horse and cause the horse to rear and her to fall? And when I looked at the case, and it's a really sad case because she left behind a young family as well, but the horse had this history of being a head shaker. And I said, in all honesty, you cannot conclude that. You don't know whether or not the horses escaped from the field first, or whether they were spooked by the horse rearing up. If the horse was a head shaker and she was struggling with it, those horses in the field could have panicked and escaped afterwards. So you can't hold the person whose horses were in the field culpable for this. You can't do it, on the balance of probabilities. And it is a real issue. So just to recap and just check that I've covered all bases. So we've got the bit causing pain. We've got the bit causing difficulties in breathing because we've got something in the mouth. We've got the bit because of those effects on breathing, actually increasing anxiety, because anyone who suffers from anxiety knows that one of the symptoms is breathlessness, and that can be interpreted. So that makes the horse more likely to spook, quite apart from the discomfort as well, also priming the horse to be more wary in that situation. You've got the discomfort of the bit also causing avoidance reactions, so the horse more likely to perhaps throw its head up or focus more on trying to reduce the discomfort of the bit, which can affect its gait, and potentially that could result in stumbling or sort of an apparent lameness.
Or falling, falling, leading to catastrophic injury, dislocations, fractures of long bones, and in fact, leading to the necessity for euthanasia.
But one thing I just want to make clear at this point, we talk about going bitless, but I don't know about you.
Can I just make a point on that word, bitless?
Well, that's the point I think I was going to make as well. I think is not.
David Mellor first recommended to me, and I have always I've adopted it since. But he suggested that it is more appropriate to use the phrase bit free rather than bitless. The word bitless has a negative connotation to it, whereas bit free is positive and emphasizes the benefits. And if you use the term bitless, it rather suggests that now by going without a bit, that you're, as it were, missing something that should be there, which is quite the wrong way to think about it.
Thank you. That's an excellent point, and I'm glad you put me right on it, because I will now use the terms bit free in future rather than bitless. Right. Because you're quite right. The way we express things has an enormous influence on the way that people think about
absolutely.
it.
Yes.
So bit free implies the animal is free of something, which
free of pain, free of suffocation, free of panic, free of fear, free of anxiety. What else can I add? All those things you've
Yeah.
mentioned. Yes.
So, but the point that I wanted to just make at this point was, we're not, when we talk about being bit free, we're not talking that all bit free bridles are necessarily comfortable, because something like a hackamore, I think, can be quite severe on a horse.
Yes, but may I again
Yeah,
interject
absolutely. I just
there?
want to make that
Uh,
point, and I think we need to elaborate it for those listening and
uh,
watching.
yes, though I would accept that, yes, a mechanical hackamore could bruise the bone of the bridge of the nose and so on. But the amount of damage that it does is trivial by comparison with the severity and enormity of the damage done by a bit. So it's really, it's comparing apples and pears to make that point that, well, not every bit-free bridle is painless, and I agree. The essence of an appropriate bit-free bridle is one that is incapable of causing pain, even in the hands of a novice. And so the bridle protects the rider from getting into trouble and protects the horse from suffering from all this list of problems and dangers. It's more dangerous to ride a horse with a bit than it is to ride bit free.
Yeah,
And
I agree with you. And I also think one thing which I've often said is, I think that people should have to be able to control a horse on the ground before they get on its back. Because
absolutely, yes, and you can do that and should do. And I'd be happy to just quickly explain the process of transitioning the horse from a bit to a bit free. It's nothing like as difficult or as complicated or as lengthy as people imagine. Would this be a moment
yeah,
for me
no,
to
please,
just explain?
please do.
Well, let's assume that overnight a rider has decided to give it a try.
As a result of
Okay,
listening to this.
yes. So let's assume that next morning the rider gets up, takes her horse, and maybe with a bitted bridle, takes the horse to an arena or a small paddock, whichever. At the arena, she takes the bitted bridle off and simply replaces it with a pain-free, bit-free bridle. Now, from the ground, as you say, the rider checks that the horse, with the benefits, with the help of this bridle and the contact that it gives, pain-free contact, just checks that the horses will follow a request to turn left, to turn right, to back up a few steps. Maybe now the rider will take the horse for a little walk around the arena to gain confidence. If she's in a paddock, maybe she could allow the horse to graze and discover that that's possible without the bit in its mouth, and drink too, so much more readily. So with that done, and having checked that the bridle is properly fitted and the horse is responding, the next stage is you mount and you go through the same process. The command to walk, trot on, turn left, turn right, back up. And by degrees, during the course of this same morning, the rider will find that she is now trotting and, believe it or not, cantering. And the results are apparent on day one. The encouraging results are already there. and showing and giving the rider huge information and so much more confidence in what is happening. And so day 2, that same rider is willing to go for a trail ride. It's as quick as that. And subsequently, as the days and the weeks progress, the rider becomes increasingly ecstatic and amazed and grateful that they had the courage to give it a try. And I don't want to sound as though I'm advertising, and I'm no longer having, I no longer have any conflicts of interest. I used to, I founded and promoted marketing a bit-free bridle for 16 years, but I sold that company in 2016. What I'd like to recommend is that somebody who is considering going bit-free, if they want to see and hear what riders' reactions are to those first exciting and exhilarating early days, they should go to the website, which is still active, the website that I compiled at www.bitlessbridle.com, and check on user comments. And there's years of library data there, shall we say, comments from riders about their experience changing from bit to bit free. And it's really very uplifting to just enjoy reading through these comments. And they're most compelling, and so many different circumstances are described, which will help riders to overcome their understandable anxiety and fear of making that transition.
We'll put the link on the website in association with the video as well, so people can get the details there. But just to repeat, www.bitlessbridle.com. And as I said, we'll make sure that the link is there for people to be able to check up on that. So so thank you for that. So one of the things which and as I said, I sort of didn't really say this properly in the introduction, but first of all, I ought to say thank you to you, because as I said, you inspired a large part of my PhD, which I wouldn't have got without that. And it was this, but what I sort of loved about your work was, as I said, it took things down to first principles, understanding, trying to understand horses, as opposed to just accepting that this is the way that horses are managed. And I think, in the last 20, 30 years, there has started to be a culture change where people have started to challenge the norm. This is the way that, the horses should be trained, and this is how they should be ridden, and started to explore other more positive experiences for the horses. And one of the things that I remember reading about was, I remember seeing a picture of a horse's lower jaw, and this was just a skeletal picture of the skeleton, so post-mortem, and there are these bony lumps where the bit sat, and the paper talks about how these could be induced by the bit.
Yes.
And I'd be interested in your feelings about this, because I worked with a colleague based at Nottingham. I also hold a visiting position at Nottingham Vet School, and the anatomist there, and he started to look at some of the samples, and I was saying about these being bit-induced osteophytes, bony reactions. And when he sectioned them, he said that the area we're talking about is sort of where the bit normally sits. Interestingly, I had looked at, they tend to occur more on the right-hand side than on the left. But in Belgium, I was at the vet school there, in their anatomy museum, I could see it more on the left than the right, but they do trotting and they go anti-clockwise around their track. So I wondered if there was more pressure. But what the anatomist told me was, and I said we haven't published this, but he thought that the bony reactions were not due to the bit, but due to redirection of the insertion of what's known as the buccinator muscle. Now, again, for those people listening, the sort of cheek muscles, the muscle that sort of fills up your cheek and gets your lower jaw to close, that's one of the, that's what the buccinator muscle does. It's not the powerful muscles at the back involved in chewing, it's for that purpose. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that, whether or not, I mean, it could be a combination of both, but he thought that maybe what was happening with the bridles is if they were tight, the horse, the angle of the muscles were changing on the face, and that is what was causing these bony reactions. And then if you put a bit on top of that, it's a bit like, you know, if you're on the beach and you get a bit of sand under your gum, and then somebody goes and pushes it, well, that becomes incredibly uncomfortable. But I just wondered what your thoughts were on that. Do you think that those bony
I'd be
reactions
happy to give you.
Yeah.
Well, I can understand your colleague, the anatomist, having that first reaction. And in fact, that was my first thought also when I first recognized those bone spurs. I thought, is this the result of muscular activity, just stressing the periosteum and so on at that point? But I quickly abandoned that explanation, and it was confirmed when I realized that, of course, not only does the bit produce bone spurs on the bars of the mouth, but it actually erodes the teeth, erodes the first cheek tooth in particular in the lower jaw. And I did a survey of skulls in 4 natural history museums up and down the east coast of the USA, and I looked at 66 jaw bones. I found bone spurs in 62% of the skulls. I also found erosion, damage to the first lower cheek tooth in the lower jaw, erosion of that tooth in 61% of the skulls.
Wow.
There was no damage to either the bars of the mouth or the teeth from in skulls from feral horses or from mature zebra.
It's interesting you've come up with that figure of 62%, because I can tell you I've been keeping a sort of tally when I go to various museums. If I'm doing a PhD viva somewhere or something like that, and they've got an anatomy, I'll go and have a look. And I can tell you, in the places I've been in Europe, I'm running at about 60% for the bone spurs as well.
Oh, that's interesting. Yes,
Europe as well. But I haven't been looking at erosions on the teeth. So can you tell me more about the sorts of erosions you're seeing there?
Well, yes, erosion, particularly to the, shall we call it, the prow of the tooth. The tooth, instead of being, comes to a point like the prow of a ship, the prow becomes flattened, rather like a buttress for a portion of the prow. And then in addition to that, the crown of the tooth is eroded and becomes smooth as a result of wear. And the wear is particularly apparent in the lower jaw of the first premolar, the first cheek tooth. And so that is again an indication of the fact that the horse, one of the tricks, I call it a trick, one of the evasions that the horse quickly learns to try and limit the pain is to grab the bit, to put the bit between its teeth. Okay. And so it now wears the molar teeth down, and not just wear, but over in the passage of time, it will actually cause such severe periodontal disease, that the tooth is exfoliated. The tooth actually is lost completely and is shed. A very serious thing to happen. Again, the bit can cause similar damage to the bars of the mouth, and a chunk of bone can actually die, form what is called a sequestrum, produce a chronic discharging fistula sinus, and the only cure for which is to carry out some surgery to remove that piece of dead bone. And of course, the other part of the treatment would be to remove the bit as well. No, these are serious and very common. Even now, although I've published a description of these findings, dental findings, I'm sorry to say that it's not something which has become common knowledge, and even dental technicians and even veterinarians apparently are not looking for these lesions.
I can feel a student project coming on.
My own finding. Yes.
I'm going to send some students down to the Natural History Museum to go and look at Roman horse skulls and see
That's
what's
right.
there.
Yes,
yes. But so, I mean, it's, yeah, well, as I said, I wasn't aware of that, and I will go looking out for it much more as well. And I think it's something that we need to be much more aware of in relation to, well, a whole range of things. So, you know, people talk about the horse getting the bit between its teeth, but what you're suggesting is actually that they do that probably far more than we actually realize.
Oh yes, far more. I'd like to put in the thought that I've already said that a horse doesn't learn, and that pain is diametrically opposed to learning. However, there is one exception to that. The horse does learn very, very quickly to try and avoid the pain. So in fact, use of a bit is teaching a horse conflict behaviors. And the horse learns a repertoire of behaviors. 69 at least have been documented by the work I've done as a result of removing the bit, studying the behavior before and after removing the bit. I've documented that at least 69 behaviors are now identified as being caused by the bit. These are aversions to the bit that we teach the horse, and they learn very, very quickly. All these habits, evasions, and ways of trying unsuccessfully, ultimately, to avoid the persistent, infuriating pain and problem that the bit is causing them.
I'm not gonna give you a Viva and ask you to list the 69 conflict behaviors at this point. But I tell you, I think a lot of listeners would be really interested in that list. So whether there's an article that we can direct them to, or if you can send me a document that I can put in associated with the
indeed
broadcast.
I would be only too glad. What I would like to do, perhaps at the end of our chat now, is to give you a list of links and to read it out so that listeners can perhaps, with pencil and paper handy, can make a note of it. And there's any amount of open access material that is obtainable, that anybody can get to. There's a website in Germany particularly that I would recommend. Welt Express has published 3 papers of mine, together with diagrams.
Yeah,
Which
I
will be,
think that would be really valuable, because one of the problems with the internet is there is so much stuff that when you've got an expert like yourself, the ones that you recommend, then people can have confidence in that. One
yes,
question I just
yes,
wanted to ask you, I mean, in your professional life, you must, being an ENT specialist, you must have removed loads of wolf teeth. Again, these are underdeveloped premolars for those people who might not be familiar with that. So where do you stand now on wolf teeth? Because obviously if we're going bit free, then
yes.
there's no need to remove them.
Oh, absolutely. That's yet one of the benefits of going bit free. You don't need to subject the horse to the necessity for removal of these wolf teeth, and so no.
Yeah.
My position on that is you don't need to do it,
Yeah.
and certainly you don't need to. Um, I'm trying to think of the phrases which set my memory now, but to do any dental work on the horse to accommodate the Brit, that in itself is completely unnecessary. No.
So
In fact, you can save. One of the benefits of going bit free, you can save on dental work, you can save on veterinary fees. The number of diseases that are caused by the bits are legion.
yeah.
And unfortunately, many of these diseases that I am convinced are caused by the bit in competition horses and in race horses, they will disappear once the rules are changed and bit-free competition is permitted. But at the moment, the rules are, shall we say, sheltering that evidence from being revealed, because no horse or very few horses are permitted to compete bit-free.
Mhm.
Once they are, then in the passage of time, people will suddenly realize, I believe, that many common diseases, interestingly, all these common diseases, so many of them are still of unknown cause. They have been with us for generations. Horsemen have been familiar with them for so long that the diseases themselves have been given familiar, stable names like roaring and dorsal displacement of the soft palate and epiglottal entrapment and scabbard trachea and bleeding, and on it goes, including, I
So
now believe, recurrent laryngeal neuropathy may well be a neurological disease caused by lack of oxygen to the recurrent laryngeal nerve as a result of training and competing constantly with a bit in a horse's mouth and reducing the flow of oxygen, which hypoxia is a common and recognized cause of neuropathy in man, and it can be, I'm sure, in the horse too.
that's really interesting, because as I said, I hadn't made that connection. And obviously when you spoke earlier about hypoxia and anxiety, but if the bit is actually interfering with the airflow, then things like EIPH, exercise induced pulmonary hemorrhage, the horse has to make greater effort in order to aerate. So that's where you get the pressure in the corners of the lungs, which cause the bleed and things like that.
Well, it's not just, if I may
Yeah.
again interject, it's not just pressure in the mouth, it's suction pressure damaging the lungs, because a horse that is trying to breathe against an upper airway obstruction inflicts what is called barotrauma. That's a barometric pressure trauma on the lungs. The breathing is a suck blow process, and if a horse has an obstructed airway, the the suck portion of that process, the inspiratory portion, sucking on inspiration and blowing on expiration, that suction pressure is seriously increased, and at each breath the horse is bruising its lungs. And what we have for too long referred to by the wrong name, exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage or bleeding, it's not the exercise that causes it, it's the barotrauma, it's the damage to the lung. And a better name for it is to use the name for a well-recognized problem in human medicine, and people can look this up on the internet. Do a search for negative pressure pulmonary edema. This is, I believe, the fundamental basic pathology of bleeding in the racehorse. It's caused, again, I'm sorry to keep using the word, it's caused by suffocation.
So just for the benefit of the listeners, you talk about the bit and, or respiratory obstruction. Can you just explain the connection between why having a bit in the mouth results in respiratory obstruction in the horse? Because it's not that all of them have got dorsal displacement of the soft palate.
No, I wonder if I can. No, I don't think I can.
I can describe it. This could be quite fun for those that are listening on the audio only. If you're gonna do a demonstration, I will look to see what my commentary skills are like.
The tongue is a muscular organ and a sense organ, I should emphasize, and it has an interesting physical property similar to that of a squeeze ball. In other words, whatever shape the tongue is, its volume is constant. So think of the length of a tongue. It's a considerable length, maybe 12 inches long, or short, not too far short of that. If the horse retracts the tip of its tongue, the root of the tongue bulges. The result of that bulge is to elevate the soft palate. The result of that elevation is to diminish the airway, the patency of the airway in the back of the throat. So you are obstructing the throat, and the word suffocation, the etymology of that word means pressure under the throat, choking. Yeah. So the horse is, I hate to use this expression, the horse is choking itself, but it's not doing that voluntarily. The rider is responsible for doing that. Yeah. And so, yes, the horse is, the tongue is bulging in the back of the throat and displacing the soft palate, which in turn produces a severe obstruction, not just to the nasopharynx, but also to the larynx. And it's a cascade of problems that occurs throughout the length of the whole respiratory tract, all the way down to the lung. In particular, it has an effect on the windpipe, because the windpipe in the horse is apparently, we think of it as being, shall we say, supported by cartilage rings, but the cartilage rings are incomplete dorsally. They are not complete circles, and so the top, the roof of the windpipe throughout the length of the horse's neck is soft. It's a soft top, like an open sports car. And the effect now of the suction pressures that are generated in a galloping horse are such that this soft top undergoes dynamic collapse. It gets pulled in, and if you watch my nostrils, if I take a deep breath with my mouth shut and breathing through the nose, each time I take a breath, my nostrils collapse. Maybe you can see that. The same thing is happening in the horse's windpipe, or throughout the length of the windpipe in the neck. And the worst obstruction is occurring at the base of the neck. There's a law of physics which explains why this should happen. It's a law of aerodynamics, first discovered in the 1800s by a Frenchman with the difficult name of Poiseur, Poisseuille. I think I've got the spelling right, hopefully. Maybe there's only one S in that. Poiseur, aerodynamic, and it's, I won't get into the physics of it, but it's a law of physics, a law of nature, that the horse's airway is subjected to as a result of obstruction, which is so common.
So just to recap again, so we've got two issues going on here. First of all, we've got the fact that because the tongue has a relatively fixed volume, as its tongue is slightly withdrawn as a result of the bit, that means the base of the tongue swells, and that pushes up against the soft palate. An analogy for people: do not try this at home, but if you've ever been in a situation where you've put too many marshmallows in your mouth, you'll know what I mean. And I've done that, and I think my wife's done it a few times. You can't breathe because you got too much in, and you can imagine sort of the base of the tongue in the horse pushing up in that way. And then you've got the issue on the windpipe itself, because the cartilage rings that hold the windpipe open, because there's a soft area at the top, because of the pressures, that's going to increase the risks of collapse in that situation as well. Yes. So you've got those two things coming together. I actually think that's a really clear description, as I said.
Before I forget to mention it, I'd love to show you a simple test which has been used very compellingly and was invented by my friend David Mellor in New Zealand. And if anyone is doubtful or debating or questioning whether a bit causes pain, let them do this. Take a pen and do what I'm doing right now.
I'm going to do it as well.
Take the pen, put it behind your lower lip, and now press down on the gum below your incisor teeth.
Yeah, it hurts. And it hurts.
Press down firmly.
I've got a rough pen. It makes it even worse.
And tell me whether you're willing to put up with that for 5 minutes, let alone 5 days of the week or 10 years of work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a great analogy in that situation.
It's the Mellor pen test. I do recommend it. Yes.
So David Mellor, those listeners who don't know him, David Mellor is one of the leading animal welfare scientists in the world at the moment, who's moved things away from animals having sort of rights and freedoms to actually the domains of animal welfare that we need to be concerned about.
Yes.
So develop the domains model, which is I think a much better way, and also promoting the idea that it's a life worth living as a welfare concept, I think.
Indeed.
Which is quite important. So one of the things which listeners may be sort of may have heard is, well, isn't head shaking caused by sort of a disease of the trigeminal nerve, which is one of the key facial nerves? And I do lecture my students on this, and I will be giving them the link to this podcast as part of this. So, but they perhaps, the trigeminal nerve serves a number of regions of the face. It serves
All
the
of
lower
them.
jaw.
Every possible region.
Well, you've got the facial nerve as well. It covers the top bit, but yeah, but the muzzle,
the main sensory nerve of the face, of the head.
So,
yes.
So there's one branch that comes out through a small hole in the lower jaw, quite close to the front, called the mental foramen.
Yes.
And then there's another branch that comes through the infraorbital foramen, which is sort of, if you imagine, those people watching can actually see where I'm pointing, but where you've got the facial ridge, just where the bridle tends to sit. There's a branch of the nerve that comes out there. I hope you're still with me. You've disappeared off the screen.
Yes, I was looking for a diagram. Yes, so it's all right. Yes.
and then obviously there's another branch that does the inside of the nose. And an important thing for people to appreciate is if you get damage of the nerve or overstimulation, actually the pain can be referred to another branch.
Yes.
So I'm intrigued. Sort of one of the things I say to the students, and you might say, no, that's junk. So I'm
no, I don't.
Create the opportunity. But
no,
if you've got inflammation,
no, I agree with it.
Well, but if you've got inflammation in around where the bars of the mouth are, then again, the gum has only got limited elasticity. So the pressure and the inflammation is going to build up on areas of least resistance. For example, the mental foramen, which is where the trigeminal nerve comes out. So in effect, if you've got inflammation on the bars of the mouth, that could result in that branch of the trigeminal nerve being squeezed, and not just the pain being felt in the mouth, but actually in the back of the nose as well. Does that make sense, do you think, as a theory?
Oh, it absolutely does. And I would add that there is another feature about the trigeminal nerve which has not been given sufficient attention. The trigeminal nerve is a sensory nerve, yes, but it also has complex connections with sensory elements of the vagus nerve. That's the 10th cranial nerve, which controls, amongst other things, the function of the heart. And there is a mammalian reflex present in all mammals, referred to as the trigeminocardiac reflex. And so when the bit is stimulating the trigeminal nerve at any point in the horse's mouth, on the bars or elsewhere, tongue, mucosa, and so on, bear in mind that the rider is also stimulating branches of the vagus nerve, and stimulation of the vagus nerve can produce cardiac arrest, inhibition of the heart. Okay. And so sudden death in the horse, I believe, may be associated with stimulation of the trigeminocardiac reflex. And again, this is something in a paper that I've published, which the link for which I'll give you before the end of the chat.
Yeah, no, thank you. So yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I saw the paper, but it's not one that I'd actually read. So thank you for going through that. So one of the other things that, so we've got the potential for inflammation in the gums causing referred pain. Also the branch of the trigeminal nerve that comes through the infraorbital foramen. If the bridle is poor fitting, I've certainly seen cases where you can just ease the bridle and the head shakings calms down as well.
May I interject there for just a moment and say there is no such thing as a properly fitted bit.
I know. I said bridle. I said bridle, not bit. I think.
Yeah, I know. Yes, I understood. But no, let me. A lot of people read about the proper fitting of a bit. There is no such thing. And so one of the other things that riders no longer have to worry about, apart from wolf teeth and dental problems, is the enormous difficulty of finding a bit that fits the mouth. There is no such thing.
Mm. Yeah, I know.
Sorry. Okay,
No,
carry
no,
on.
I take that point absolutely. So yes, it's a question of how bad it is for the horse, as opposed to getting it. They
It's
talk about seating of the bit
unacceptable.
and stuff like that.
It's completely unacceptable.
So, again, one of the other features of head shaking that is often reported is that it's often worse at the trot. Now, this is the bit of work that I did with the third cook that I've worked with on head shaking in horses. And again, we didn't publish it, unfortunately. But we tried to build some models, actually with a colleague at work who works in fluid dynamics. And basically what we did is we took some, in effect, some tubes, and it was a fairly crude model, but it was quite neat. So when the horse is in a trot, then the angle of the airflow going up the nose and then down the trachea, in effect, is quite acute. Whereas when the horse is galloping, it's you don't have that kick, that angle. It's
the
much
head
more
is
subtle.
extended. Yeah.
And so what we did is we then we tried to model this, and then the risk of turbulence. And it, as I said, it wasn't. I mean, it was a lot of work, and I'm not belittling the students' work, but it was a fairly crude model, and it did look like that when you've got that acute angle, then you're much more likely to get turbulent airflow.
Oh, absolutely.
And
yes.
So when the horse is in a trot, it looks like the horse is more likely to get disturbance of air basically at the back of its nose, which could potentially explain why things are worse. But I don't know whether you've got any other thoughts as to why head shaking seems to be worse at the trot. Is it because the horse is more collected and maybe more pressure in the mouth? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, I would agree that it's very apparent at the trot. It's also, interestingly, more common in the male horse than the female. And there's a good reason for that, because although we talk about the bit being placed in the interdental space, the bars of the mouth, the diastema, the gap, or it apparently has been provided by evolution, inviting us to put a foreign body in the horse's mouth. It appears to be free of teeth and a convenient place to put a foreign body. In fact, it's not free of teeth. The canine tooth, the root of the canine tooth, is lying immediately under the bars of the mouth, the ridge, the top ridge of the bars of the mouth. And the canine tooth is still developing until the horse is 5 years of age. And so a racehorse is working with a bit in its mouth during the time of its life when its teeth are still erupting. This is another reason why head shaking occurs and so many other pain avoidance behaviors.
Obviously, if the tooth is developing underneath, it makes it even more sensitive, I guess. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So, and as I said, it's not. I've referred a lot to head shaking simply because that's sort of an area that I've worked on and I'm continuing to work on. But as you say, there's a whole range of other signs of discomfort and other conditions that we need to be aware of associated with the use of the bit. We've mentioned obviously things like dorsal displacement of the soft palate where the horse is choking up, that sort of thing. And it is quite spectacular, and you do see that it seems obviously in racehorses you get things like the choking up when the horse is racing and it looks like it's going to win the race and it just stops almost because it can't breathe. But head shaking in race horses is quite uncommon compared to other sort of sports? Is that, do you think, because
it's if it was properly observed, I think it will be found that there was plenty of head shaking in racehorses in the paddock, in the preparation, in the prior to the race itself. When the horse is galloping, it's far too busy trying to survive and breathe. So yes, at the gallop, you don't see head shaking, but you do see stumbling and you see falling and catastrophic accidents. But no, if some student was looking for a project, I would recommend that they attended racetrack meetings and made note and video recordings of the head shaking and spooking and rearing that occurs in the paddock and or in the starting gate as a result of pain and fear.
We've got Market Raisin nearby, so I could send students off there to go and observe the horses.
Right. Yes.
But yeah, and I guess also, you know, it's like some insurance companies, they sometimes sort of, they get somebody with very heavy hands to make sure that they can control the horse, even if it is trying to toss its head, etc. So just want to make the point, it is far more than just head shaking that we're talking about. But I'm conscious of time, and and I know we've talked a lot about the bit, but I also wanted to talk to you about horseshoes as well. But is there anything you want to say more about the bit before we move on to horseshoes, your latest campaign?
Oh, goodness me, what a question. Yes, and I've only got a few minutes to tell you about it. The bit is an abomination, I have to say, and it's time we did away with it. It should be relegated to museums. It's a bygone. And there will come a time, I hope, in the not too distant future, when it's recognized for what it is. It's an instrument of, well, I can't resist using it. It should not be there. It was a Bronze Age of mistake, and it's taking us a little time to correct ourselves.
And I think I know you've said in the past about perhaps one of the biggest problems is that competition rules refer to things like light pressure of the bit. So by default, the animal's got to have a bit in its mouth, and we've got to get rid of that as being important in scoring. And actually just appreciate the beauty of what we see if we're going, in dressage and the like, that, somebody who can do it without a bit, and that's far more admirable, and that's what we ought to be giving.
Indeed,
that's what we ought to be giving the high points to. So there's a cultural issue there as well, I think, that we've got to deal with. Indeed. So one of your papers, actually, I must ask this because I think I love the titles of some of your articles. Why should we worship farriers? Because people who don't know that in this country, the farrier profession is known as the Worshipful Company of Farriers. But one of them, which again I haven't read, and I have to confess, was, and I wish I'd had more time to read more, but there were actually so many of your articles I was thinking, why haven't I read that? But it was an apology to the horse after 88 years of pain. I just had to think, what were the 88 years? Because I'm thinking, this is, as you say, this has gone back since the Bronze Age, introducing bits. So where does the 88 years take us to, and what was the apology about?
That's a good question, and I've forgotten where that number generated itself in my mind from. 88 years. I would have to think about that. I suppose
I ought to have looked at what year it came out, because then I could work out where that would take us back.
No, it may be to do with the moment when competition sports were more formalized and rules were being drawn up. Though I would think that would take us back further than 88 years. It would take us back to the 19th century.
Well, that was 2010. So yeah, it would have
yes,
taken us back to about 1920s, that
yes.
article. But as I said, that's Natural Horse Magazine, which is not easy to get hold of. So I hadn't read it. But if you've got a copy of it, or anybody out there's got a copy of it, perhaps you can remind all of us then.
I think that's a conservative number.
Yeah, okay. Shall we move on to horseshoes then? Are you happy to?
Well,
are you happy to move on to horseshoes for a little bit?
By all means, yes.
You've got a little bit longer.
I think this is another piece of iron that the horse does not need and should not be encumbered with. The horse's hoof has evolved for millions of years. It's an expandable and very sensitive item. And it is, I won't say designed, it's evolved to expand on taking weight. And the horseshoe is a cramp. It's an iron cramp that prevents expansion. And so it's, again, it's pathophysiological to nail a shoe onto a horse's foot. Again, the horse does not need it, and the horse is so much better and happier and pain-free and navicular-free. Diseases, so many are caused by the shoe. And again, the test of the test of the hypothesis is to remove the shoe and trim the foot correctly, barefoot, and in the passage of time, the hoof will regain the shape that nature intended it to be, and the horse will be so much better as a result.
What about people who say that, well, if I ride my horse on hard surfaces, then I need a shoe to protect the hoof? What do you say to that?
I would say that that's an incorrect assumption, and that the horse can be and should be trimmed and can be used on hard surfaces without becoming overworn. Obviously, that can be looked out for if it should be happening, but no, that's not a reason for putting a shoe on a horse to protect it. The evolution has protected the horse's hoof very well. And as you know, horses have been living in rocky conditions ever since the horse was first evolved. Mountain areas, desert areas, hard ground. It's part of what it's equipped to do by evolution.
But you got the extra weight of a rider, which adds extra force for the abrasion, though. I'm just repeating some of the arguments that I've heard people say.
Yes, but again, the horse was evolved to withstand the extra weight of pregnancy, which is no more than the heavy weight of the rider. And that has been, shall we say, thought of in the process of evolution.
No, that's a great response. Thank you for that. So what do you think are the primary things that, I mean, obviously you'd rather the horses didn't have shoes. We've talked about some of the things to look out for to try and convince people that that there are problems with the bit. What do you think are the primary things that people should look out for to perhaps make them think twice about having their horse shod?
The expense.
That's a great one at this juncture, yeah. But
not just of the farrier's performance, but of the expense of laming their own horse by putting shoes on, by causing navicular disease, amongst other things, white line disease, cracks in the quarter, and so on. So many problems, laminitis, and on it goes, are, shall we say, rendered more likely by virtue of the fact that the horse is shod. And the reason why Hiltrud Strasser, Dr. Strasser from Germany, first began to explore the problems of shoeing was that she noticed that she was has been a lifelong horsewoman, as her husband was, and they had horses that were kept in stables, and they had horses that were out in the field. And she made the simple observation that those horses that were in the field without shoes were never a problem, or nothing like the problem with lameness that the horses were that were shod and in stables. And so she began to explore why that was. And that was the basis of her wonderful work that she did to introduce people to the enormity of nailing an iron cramp to all four hooves.
So, okay, there's one other thing I wanted to ask you about. Is there anything else you'd like to say about shoes at this point? Because I was going to ask you a more general question about riding, but I don't.
Well, a general comment would be to say that shoes for the horse are bad luck.
Yeah. Okay.
And they're bad luck for the rider too. Bad luck for the owner.
Right. So, assuming that you think it's okay to get on the back of a horse, what do you think? And I'm just fascinated by this, and I hadn't prepared this, and it's just listening to you. And as I said at the beginning that you were sort of a contemporary of my father's. You're a few years younger than he is. So you're born a few years later than him. So, but one of the things that always sort of impressed me about my dad is that when he went to vet school, he was taught first principles, and that's the thing that he taught me. And I think that's why I probably end up in behavior, because it's an area where you have to work from first principles. And you're clearly somebody who still understands, the biology that underpins medicine, because too often I think nowadays clinicians are just taught rote and don't understand the first principles. So I'd just be really interested in your thoughts as to what age you think we should be getting onto horses and riding them. You got any thoughts on that?
It's a good question, certainly. I think it would be it would make sense to delay that moment when a horse is expected to take a weight on its spine. And certainly when it comes to racehorses, the yearling racehorse, so-called yearling, that perhaps aren't even quite 12 months old, they are expected to take the weight of a jockey and others. It would be better, I feel sure, if that moment was delayed until, well, a year or two later, ideally, given the chance for the horse to mature, not only erupt teeth and get over that portion of its life, but the economy of keeping horses encourages people to shall we say, start the process of training too early.
And sorry, there's just lots of things, and I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to run through a few things, if that's okay, fairly quickly. So we've talked about bits, we've talked about shoes. Let's talk about saddles, because you've got to have some opinions on saddles and the fitting of saddles. I mean, which I know people who are very, very skilled in this, but do you see a bit further back than the ear, nose, and throat, I know, but given your interest in locomotion and movement, any comments on saddles for people?
Well, they are certainly a potential source of pain, and certainly the fit of the saddle is something that needs to be checked and determined and ensured that the saddle is not causing trouble. So yes, and
so a simple test,
maybe yes, a little more bareback riding would be a good idea too.
Yeah. And I mean, a simple test which a friend of mine who's a veterinary physiotherapist taught me, and it's so obvious, but it's a simple test that any owner can do, is get your horse's saddle and every week close your eyes and run your hands down it on upside down. And because you do it with your eyes closed, you will pick up imperfections and asymmetries so much more in it. And before you put it on the horse's back. And I think it's a really simple thing that people can do. And if it doesn't feel right, then get it seen to. But
yes, I think so.
Yeah.
So close your eyes when saddling a horse and open your eyes when bitting a horse.
That's brilliant. That's a wonderful point. And maybe on that point we should close. And
can I give you the links?
Yeah, absolutely. So
articles.
While you gather the links, I'm just going to sort of say my thank you to yourself. As I said, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you today. As I said, we've corresponded via email for quite a few years, and as I said, doing these podcasts is a way of me saying thank you to people who have inspired me, some of whom may not realize just how much influence they've had. As I said, in your case, a large chunk of my PhD was on head shaking, and it really struck me that, you know, what I tried to do in my PhD was I took 3 repetitive behavior problems and I looked to see how we could synthesize sort of some of the veterinary skills and also some behavioral skills. And head shaking to me was one of those areas that was seen as a medical problem, but nobody seemed to be looking at detail in the signs. And that, you know, that inspiration and the need to look at the variety came from your own work. So thank you very much. And I know lots of people have moved that forward as well. So, you know, thank you for chatting to me, and also thank you on behalf of lots of horses.
Well, I thank you for giving me the opportunity to chat about these matters. That's been a help, and I think it's important, and I hope it's been a help to those who are listening. So here are some articles that I would recommend. I'll give you the Welt Express link first. So get writing with HTTPS, the usual introduction, https:// E for England, N for Norway, Welt Express, that's one word, spelt WELTEXPRESS, weltexpress.info, short for information, weltexpress.info/2021/09/29 pain-free-horsemanship, all one word. And in Germany, apparently they spell horsemanship with 2 N's. So HORSEMANNSHIP. So that's the first one, but there are 2 other articles also on Welt Express that what they can look for. One is was published in 2019, and it's been obviously, judging from the comment on their own website, it's one of the most popular articles. And the the name of the article is, or I should say, the first article, the name of that obviously is Pain-Free Horsemanship. This second article I'm talking about, the article is called Horsemanship's Elephant in the Room. And another article that, again, I would recommend, again, at Welt Express, that can be looked for, and which may turn up as people open up the website, the title of which is The Bit as a Cause of Unsolved Problems Affecting Both Horse and Rider. So that's another article published in 2019. But in addition, and finally, I would recommend people looked at the website for the World Bitless Association. And the link for that would be https:// and then all one word, worldbitlessassociation.org, /resources. And there are 3 articles of mine there which are accessible. The one that I would particularly recommend has the title Sudden Death in the Racehorse. But there are 2 others. One is, does use of a bit endanger the safety of horse and rider? And the third one is, the effect of bit-induced pain on the feelings of the rider about riding. And all 3 articles are accessible. It might be that in order to access them, the reader may have to subscribe a modest amount in order to become a friend of World Bitless Association. Sometimes I think that's a mistake, that there is a paywall there, but it's a very modest request, and dare I say it, I hope that the viewers will find that that's a very justifiable expense.
Thank you for your time, and which you've given freely. I'll get all of those links up onto the website as well. So
lovely. Yes. Yeah.
So thank you once again. Is there anything else you want to say before we close down? Or
well, thank you to the horse for teaching me about the horse, and I've learned so much and still learning. I am optimistic about the future of the horse, in that I see the trend and the movement is towards better, improved welfare for the horse. And so if I was a horse today, I would be feeling fairly optimistic that before too long, I hope, the rules will be reviewed, and bit-free riding will be trialed by the administrations, as a result of which they will now modify their rules and permit bit-free riding, bit-free competition.
And if I can just add to that, I mean, I agree with your optimism, and I think it's in no small part due to your enthusiasm and lifelong commitment to it as well. So thank you on behalf of the horses as well.
Oh, my welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If so, please remember to give us a like or subscribe. It helps more than you know. We all do these episodes for free because we hope people will take something useful from them. So giving us a like and subscribing helps others find us and related content. We have a lot more episodes for you to enjoy on our podcast platform, with videos on my YouTube channel together with other resources. Just search for What Makes You Click and Daniel Mills. Subscribing to both our Facebook group and YouTube channel not only helps in a similar way, but also means you shouldn't miss when the next episode comes out. Thanks once again, and feel free to post a comment or suggestion. Bye now.